Light spills from Iolani Palace like warm water, pooling on the steps, catching the gold of a royal seal pressed into fresh wax. The trade wind lifts the edges of parchment and carries salt into the room, a clean sting that makes you blink. You run your thumb along the ribbon and feel the promise and the danger braided into it, as if the paper itself can sense the world leaning closer. You came for a story, but what you hold is a wager. You can hear the hush before signatures, the scrape of a chair, the small cough that always precedes boldness. You want to know if a small kingdom can stand where waves and empires meet. You want to know if law can be armor. Before we dive in, subscribe to What If Wars, because this is where your curiosity gets teeth. Look up. The lamps in Honolulu throw ovals of light on stone and coral. Down at the harbor, rigging clicks like prayer beads, and the water shivers around a cutter tied fast to the quay. Close your eyes, and the ocean speaks numbers. 1843. Britannia and France. Names on a declaration that the Hawaiian Kingdom is a state among states. The Paulet affair still a bruise under the skin, a reminder that recognition is not protection, only a contract you must enforce with wit, paper, and friends who keep their word. You smell ink and lemon oil. You taste the iron of resolve. In these rooms, sovereignty is measured in paragraphs, not cannons. A British envoy sets his jaw and recites the phrases he has memorized. A Hawaiian secretary checks each clause against a list he keeps in his head. Titles, harbors, debts, dignity. The signatures dry. The ribbon tightens. You walk outside into a night so clear it sounds like glass. And you feel a nation settle its shoulders and breathe. Now, you walk out of the palace and into the fields, where 1848 slices the island into plots. The Great Māhele is not an idea. It is a boundary stone warmed by the sun, a deed read aloud to a grandmother who holds the paper as if it might bite her. It is the relief of secure title and the cold panic of losing land because a form was missed, a word mistranslated, a fee unpaid. The old system dissolves into parcels that can be bought, mortgaged, seized. You count new fences. You count new hands. You count how quickly sugar learns to draft the law to its advantage. Stand on a hillside above a cane field at noon. Heat climbs until it finds your spine. A foreman flags a wagon toward the mill, while a clerk in a felt hat tallies weight with slate and chalk. The numbers feed a ledger. The ledger feeds a boardroom. The boardroom begins to imagine it is the kingdom. The Māhele was a knife and a needle, cutting and stitching at once. In the cut, planter power found a grip. In the stitch, a monarchy tried to bind itself to the modern world without tearing. You walk into a churchyard and feel the ground sink under your feet, not with mud, with absence. Graves begin to repeat the same years: measles, whooping cough, influenza. A people's body thinned by contact until whole valleys sound quieter, like a drum with its skin slackened. You count the living by listening: drums, chants, laughter from a fishing beach in Hilo. Voices, fewer than the winds remember. The kingdom answers its wound with labor from across the sea. A ship from Yokohama hisses at the dock. A family from Guangdong peers beneath a brim at the light. A Portuguese mason unloads his trowel and hopes the lime here sets the same. Honolulu Harbor learns new syllables. A steamer bell strikes the hour. You take in a chorus with no single tongue and feel the future add weight to the planks beneath your feet. Walk past Lahaina at dusk. The whaling boats that once made the streets loud with coin and risk sit lower in the water. Whale oil wanes, kerosene rises, the old trade thins and leaves behind tavern chairs and stories that taste of salt and bravado. But the islands are not done changing keys. A cable will come, men say. A wire under the sea that will make mornings arrive with news from San Francisco and Yokohama before the dew dries on the taro. Steamers already keep time with the calendar and the clock, not the weather. You stand on the wharf and feel how a place can be a hinge. Inside a government office, a young clerk drafts a tariff memo and worries the edge of the page until it feathers. His sleeves are rolled. His hair is too long for an older judge's liking. He has learned to pray in 2 languages and to count in 3. He knows that the kingdom's strength is not the size of its garrison, but the precision of its laws. the fairness of its courts, the cleanliness of its contracts. He has seen a sugar agent win a vote with dinner and credit, and a promise written on stationery with an American masthead. He has watched a farmer sell a portion of his inheritance to pay a tax he did not expect. He decides that policy is a kind of coastline. Draw it wrong, and the sea takes more than you can afford. You cross King Street with the smell of bread and ink in your nose, and hear children reciting the alphabet in 2 alphabets. A schoolmistress raps a table and smiles at a boy who stumbles on an English vowel and then catches it clean on the second try. Culture is still a living current, not a museum. A chant rises behind a door, as gently as steam, and then takes the rafters in both hands. You feel pride like a fever that gives you strength, not delirium. The palace gardens hold you for a moment in their careful shade, and you rehearse what must be done if independence is to be not a chapter, but a spine. Treaties that braid obligation with leverage, courts that can tell a minister no, a land policy that prizes hands that plant over portfolios that do not sweat, and a harbor that pays for the kingdom without owning it. Someone says pearl, and your mind makes a string of them. Oysters, harbors, coves, and then the single one that matters, smooth and hard beneath the tongue of the Pacific. It is still a repair stop, a place to coal and caulk. But even now you can hear deeper water knocking like a knuckle on a table, deep enough to tempt any admiral, deep enough to turn a port into a promise you may not want to keep. Back in the cabinet room, a map lies open. The paper smells of starch and pencil shavings. Your finger traces a thin line between Honolulu and San Francisco, another to Yokohama, another down to Samoa. Lines become corridors. Corridors become dependencies. The Minister for Finance quotes prices per hundredweight and the dates on which they will be renegotiated. He does not mention the other price, the one paid when your prosperity limits your choices. You feel how a treaty can be both a lifeline and a leash. In the year ahead, a document will be drafted that promises more ships and higher profits. The Reciprocity Treaty will look like a gate that opens. Listen closely, and it also shuts. But you are not there yet. Tonight belongs to recognition earned in 1843, to a palace lit with resolve, to a kingdom that has learned the language of Europe without swallowing its tongue. It belongs to the Māhele's double edge, and to a people counting their dead and their children with the same careful hands. If the kingdom can make paper behave like stone, law that does not bend in the heat, deeds that keep families on their land, tariffs that think like centuries, then what comes next can be shaped rather than suffered. The harbor waits. The cable waits. The men with calculators in their pockets wait. You stand in the doorway between old and new, and ask a question that sounds like surf over coral. When the door opens in 1875, will you step through with your eyes open, or will the corridor close behind you? The treaty is a door that swings on 2 hinges at once. In 1875, you hear it creak and clap in the same breath. Men in dark coats smile at one another and talk about friendship, while clerks count duties that will no longer be paid. Sugar goes duty-free into American ports. Ships queue like gulls along a rail. You feel the island's pulse quicken, a pleasant hurry in the veins. It sounds like profit. It tastes like promise. Walk down to Honolulu Harbor at first light. The masts are fewer than in the whaling days, but the funnels are taller, black and certain, and the steam smells like iron and wet rope. A stevedore chalks 1876 on a crate for bookkeeping and spits in the dust. You watch a foreman slap a shipping mark onto burlap, plantation initials, island code, weight. The numbers rise year on year, ledgers darken with ink, mills add a second shift. You tell yourself growth is a clean word. You hold your breath and listen for the cost hidden inside it. Lahaina looks different. The swagger of whalemen has drained away with the lamps that no longer need them. A barkentine slides out like a memory. A steamer slides in like a schedule. A boy on the pier reads a timetable for Pacific Mail, finger underlining departure days, and learns that the ocean now keeps appointments. You feel the horizon draw closer and the choices draw fewer. The treaty is a corridor, straight, fast, well lit. It is also a corridor with only one exit. In a counting room off King Street, a sugar agent brings you the first price sheet of the season. The decimal points gleam like teeth. He names the American refineries that will take all you can grow and offers to advance credit on next year's crop. You notice the second page, conditions, liens, the way a signature can follow you into the next harvest, like a shadow that never shortens. You imagine another set of papers, the ones you wish existed, and you begin to write them in your head. You draft a clause for dual markets. A Liverpool buyer signs in blue ink, a Yokohama broker in black. The island names both in the same sentence and insists on a floor price pegged to more than a single docking bay in San Francisco. You imagine a refinery furnace hissing in Honolulu, heat running up your sleeves when you stand too close. You keep more value at home, you tell yourself. More jobs, more skill, less dependence on someone else's valves. You add one more page, a stabilization fund, a 0.5% levy on each shipment, invisible to the taste of a spoon, but enough to keep the mill wheels turning when prices stagger. You scratch a note in the margin, managed by law, audited in daylight, bled out only in storms. Afternoon breaks hard over fields you can smell before you see. Cane cracks under knives, bagasse dust sticks to sweat and turns men the color of the road. A supervisor checks the flow of juice and nods at the millwright. A minute saved here, a fraction there, and the whole season shifts. You walk the rows and hear Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, woven into orders and jokes. A braid of languages that makes the work move. The gain is real. The sound of money is a steady thing, like water over stones. That steadiness can hypnotize you. You stop at a table where a young finance clerk has spread maps flat and pinned their corners. He is drawing thin lines between ports and writing figures in the margins. Insurance rates, freight charges, interest on advances. He circles a single harbor with a dull pencil until the paper shines. Pearl Harbor, a coaling stop, a repair cove. Not yet the deep-throated giant it could become, but the sound is in the bay if you listen. Depth knocking from beneath, a promise to any navy with the imagination to hear it. He says softly that a port is a mouth. Feed it wisely and it nourishes you. Make it hungry for the wrong thing and it eats you from the inside out. You test a counterweight. On a cool evening in 1877, you walk the palace corridor with a draft that tastes like salt and compromise. You propose language that keeps Pearl Harbor commercial and inspected. A free port with fees and tonnage limits. A harbor whose rules are read aloud by more than one flag. You see a commission room with 3 clocks, Honolulu, London, Tokyo, where inspectors sign off on coaling chits the way priests sign marriage books. The cost is immediate. A friendly admiral will look at you as if you have forgotten who guards your mailbox. A banker will shorten your credit and lengthen your explanations. You write the costs into the margin and refuse to pretend they aren't there. Night on Britannia is a wash of lamplight and cartwheels. Sugar barons step down from carriages with dust on their cuffs and certainty in their eyes. They like a single buyer because it is simple and profitable. They call diversification romantic and neutralization theory. You answer in a voice calm enough to survive a dinner table that the simplest line is not always the strongest beam. You tilt the map under the light until routes you have ignored begin to glimmer. Sydney, Vancouver, Manila. You say the names out loud and they sound like life preservers tossed ahead of a storm. In a schoolhouse near Hilo, a teacher writes Reciprocity on the slate and wipes sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. A child raises a palm and asks if the word means friends. The teacher smiles and says, sometimes. You feel the room tilt toward the truth. Treaties are friendships that must be fed. The question is who brings the bread? Who mills the flour, who owns the oven, and who holds the ledger when winter leans in. Back at the harbor, a steamer coughs out smoke at dawn, and a man in a bowler hat unfolds a letter that offers an option on wharfage in exchange for faster handling, better rates, first call. You can have efficiency if you accept dependence. You can have choice if you accept friction. You pick up a piece of coral from the waterline and feel how easily it crumbles when you squeeze too hard. You promise yourself to hold differently. A month later, you are in a room where the air tastes like old leather and new ink. A counselor argues that an on-island refinery will anger powerful friends and suck capital into furnaces, when it might be better used in fields. You answer with the hiss of imagined steam and the clatter of cans stamped Honolulu instead of San Francisco. You lay out the arithmetic of wages that remain in Kona and Hilo, apprenticeships that lift boys into trades, a fund that cushions a bad year so that families do not sell titles they cannot replace. He says the island is not a factory. You say it is not a dependency either. The cable is still a rumor, a steel nerve not yet threaded under the Pacific, but local lines crackle between offices and mills, and a clerk taps out numbers that stabilize nerves or ruin afternoons. You realize that information is a commodity too, as real as sugar, as dangerous as credit. You sketch a small office that collects prices from more than one market and posts them in the papers, a lighthouse of numbers, so planters cannot be lied to cheaply. It will offend someone. You accept that offense is the price of clarity. Walk past Pearl River again at low tide, where mud glistens like lacquer and birds pick at the edges of something larger than themselves. If the harbor remains a place for rope and coal and barrels of pitch, it will be a servant. If it becomes a base, it will be a master. You propose inspections, fees, a ledger of hulls and tonnages that leans toward commerce and away from cannon. You propose that Hawaii never grant exclusive use to anyone, that the only exclusivity be fairness, tested by visitors who do not wear your badge. You write the words and understand exactly whom they will trouble. The year 1887 is a line you can feel before you reach it, a tightening of the air in parlors and boardrooms, a patience that begins to fray on both sides of a chessboard. You can smell the metal of it the way you smell rain before it arrives. For now the mills hum, the harbor feeds ships, the treaty pays. The corridor is bright and straight and full of footsteps. When you close your eyes, you can see the switch that could darken it in an instant. A tariff passed far away by men who have never watched Cain burn blue at night. Prosperity teaches you to walk quickly. Independence teaches you to watch the floorboards. The map in your hands is narrowing even as the numbers rise. You fold it once, then again, and feel it thicken like a warning under your thumb. What happens when the price sheet turns and the door you trusted clicks shut? You feel the room before you see it, air thick with heat and varnish, a clock that refuses to tick loud enough, men who do not bring rifles into the palace because the rifles are already in the street. The paper on the table looks like law, but the metal in the hallway turns it into something else. In 1887, a pen moves under pressure you can taste. The signature is steady, the wrist above it is not. Outside, someone laughs too loudly and the horses stamp as if they smell rain. You step back from the door, knowing a constitution can be born with a bruise. Walk out into afternoon glare and read what has been narrowed, franchise drawn tight around property and income, cabinets rearranged by threat rather than debate. The balance tilts, not with a crash, but with the quiet click of mechanisms reset. You hear the click in the registry office where a clerk now asks for proofs that many will never be able to show. You hear it in a drawing room where men with good boots speak about order while keeping their eyes on a map of fields. You hear it in a church where an elder asks if sovereignty still has a chair in the front row. You stand in the yard and make your hands into scales. On one side, the new rules, sharp and efficient. On the other, the ground that fed them. You cannot pretend the weight is equal, so you change how the measure is done. A jurist in a wool coat stays late in a room that smells of ink and rain and drafts a court that will not belong to any cabinet. 3 benches, 1 voice. Powers written with the care of someone carving across the grain. Review, not mere advice. The judges hold terms that outlast ministers, so they can say no without looking over their shoulders every season. He writes the jurisdiction down the spine of the page and underlines it once, then twice. He pauses, hearing only the rain, and adds one more line. This court will read the kingdom's promises not just as words, but as boundaries. Before dawn, in a lot near Cape Alama, boots scuff grit and a whistle splits the air. A small gendarmerie, fewer than 200 men, drills in files neat enough to steady a heartbeat. Their uniforms are plain, their rifles clean, no cannon, no parade. A tall sergeant with a scar from Malta calls cadence in English and then softly in Hawaiian, so the rhythm fits the tongue. This force is not for war. It is for doors, ballots, and nights when rumor gathers in knots and needs a lantern and a voice that does not tremble. You buy 2 cutters with short drafts and stout engines and paint their names in letters that the harbor can read from a distance. Not bristling warships, only teeth enough to keep order civil and make smuggling more expensive than patience. In the legislature, a reformer rises with papers that look thin until you feel what they carry. Land caps. No man or company, no matter how smooth the accounting, may hold beyond a set share of any district's arable acres. The number is argued, lowered, raised, lowered again. It lands where it still bites. He adds a rule against shell charters that hide the same hand inside many gloves. The gallery murmurs. A planter whispers that capital is sensitive, like a fine instrument you must not jar. The reformer says that a violin is useless if you sell the bow. You can hear the strings stretch and settle. At a polling place near Nuuanu, a woman in a gray dress reads names from a wooden table with a bell beside her elbow. The roll is long and mixed and human. Kanaka Maoli farmers, sons of Yokohama, laborers with callous palms and clean shirts. A Portuguese carpenter who smears a thumb on the registry line and blushes at the smudge. A Chinese shopkeeper with spectacles and a folded umbrella, patient as if patience were a vote too. The threshold to sign is still a test. Residency proven, taxes paid, letters read aloud. But the test does not privilege one language, one color, one ledger. If you can read Hawaiian or English or a test passage in your mother tongue rendered faithfully, if you can show you are part of the island's body, your hand may mark the paper. A boy outside counts the accents he hears and grins as if numbers were music. In a bank office on Merchant Street, the air is cool and smells of oilcloth. A sugar agent leans back and says that your court is a block in the road, your land caps a theft in slow motion, your drill yard a provocation. He points at the ledger and taps a column where interest rates are higher than last month by a hair that feels like a blade. He says your island must be friendly to money if it is to live. You answer that friendship has never required surrender. You slide across the desk a draft of your refinery charter. The stabilization fund rules copied in a clerk's even hand, the inspection clauses for a harbor that keeps commerce honest and powder at arm's length. You speak quietly, so he must lean in to hear you say that order written carefully is cheaper than order written in blood. Then the price sheet arrives like weather. 1890 stamps itself on every invoice. The McKinley law wipes the duty from raw sugar and pays a bounty to domestic planters across the ocean. 2 cents a pound, like a drumbeat that drowns your advantage. You stand in a mill yard and listen to the sound of money going elsewhere. It is as steady as the cane elevator used to be. Workers look up from their lunches with the same question in different faces. The manager folds a list and puts it in his pocket because the list is jobs and cuts, and he does not want to make his mouth say the words yet. You take the loss and turn it into a hinge. The refinery fires stutter and then catch, and the first barrels stamped Honolulu roll with a clatter that feels like defiance. The fund you bled from profit in good months bleeds back, enough to hold wages above the floor where dignity bruises. Liverpool takes a shipment, Yokohama another. The freight is dearer. The paperwork is a forest. But you have trained clerks to love forms more than gossip, and the forest becomes a garden with paths if walked often enough. You learn to bow to 3 markets without bowing to any man. Back in the courts, the first real case walks through the door, sweat-damp and serious. A company has purchased land by stepping around the cap with 3 names that share one spirit. The new bench reads the papers and the purchase deeds as if they were bones. The chief judge, a woman whose hair is more gray than black now, writes an opinion that holds the letter and the intention in the same breath. She does not sermonize. She counts, and the counting makes a wall you cannot see until you touch it and know it stops you. Outside, the newspapers run editorials that sound like thunder over empty plains. Inside, the wall holds. On a drill field, the gendarmerie practices dispersing a crowd that is only itself. Men standing in for men they hope never to face. They rehearse moving slow. They rehearse speaking first. They rehearse laying hands only to steady. A British advisor watches, hat in hand, and says that restraint is harder to teach than aggression, but lasts longer in the bloodstream. You can feel the truth in your teeth. You sign a code for use of force that reads like a catechism. Any officer who breaks it will stand before the same court that guards the land. At the harbor, a cutter eases alongside a schooner whose manifest is half true. An inspector in a white shirt and a sunburn waves the master to hold and counts barrels that do not match the list. A fine is levied and paid without spectacle. What could have been a fight is a receipt and a lesson. The cutters will never frighten a navy. They frighten only those who count smuggling as a strategy, and they do it with the quiet that makes reputations click into place like a latch. You can feel the other side gathering, in back rooms cooled by palms and front rooms warmed by whiskey. The committee that will choose safety over law and profit over patience practices the tone of concern. They say the word stability as if it were a talisman. They talk about the Constitution they bent in 1887 as if the bend were a repair. You watch them as you would a weather vane and wind that is shifting faster than the clouds explain. So, you make speed without haste. You draft a bill that asks the people a question so simple it fits on a card. Shall this kingdom affirm a charter that restores review to the court, returns the franchise to the many who plant and teach and mend, bars the swallowing of districts by single throats, and keeps its harbor for commerce under inspection that no flag can buy? The question is long when you say it aloud, but when it is printed it is only a few lines thick, black on white, with a space below for a mark that could steady a government or shatter an illusion. You carry a stack of those cards down the palace steps and feel the weight of paper against your palm. Breeze tries to lift the corners and cannot. Somewhere a bell strikes the quarter hour. Somewhere a mill whistle blows, and the sound lingers like steam over wet cane. Somewhere a man who prefers cabinets he can knock over like stools asks an envoy whether a ship might be nearby if one were needed. You hold a single card between two fingers and imagine it passing from hand to hand in schoolhouses and meeting halls, in fish markets and cane fields, in parlors where disagreements have the elegance of polished wood, and in porches where truth is spoken with boots off and feet up. Can a vote and a judgment arrive before a plot does? You look at the card until the paper warms, and then you lift your eyes to the door to see who is coming in. You hear boots on coral before you see the men who wear them. Not the boot thunder of an army, the careful tread of people who believe their step is already lawful. The committee has practiced its concern until it sounds like virtue. A telegram snaps open in a parlor that smells of molasses and cigars. A minister glances at the harbor where a ship idles with the patience of a loaded gun. The air grows thin in rooms where law should be thick. You take the referendum cards into the square before anyone else can name the day. Morning light climbs the face of the courthouse and makes the clock hands honest. A priest, a shopkeeper, a teacher, a longshoreman, 4 signatures on a statement pinned to the door. The vote is lawful, the count transparent, observers welcome. Your gendarmerie stands in their plain coats with hats off and rifles shouldered, faces open as a porch. No bayonets, the captain says, not as mercy as policy. And you taste how policy can be braver than swagger. A man in a dark suit clears his throat and announces a provisional cabinet that did not earn its place. He says emergency and stability and responsibility. He says the throne has placed the kingdom in peril. You answer through a window left open on purpose. You say the charter is not a rumor. It is paper on desks the whole island can visit. You say a vote will speak louder than any parlor. You say arbitration is ready, that cables stand coiled to London and Tokyo if anyone doubts where justice can be weighed. The room blinks at the word arbitration as if you offered an unfamiliar fruit and asked them to taste it in public. Down at the harbor, sailors from the Boston step ashore by the 100, boots ringing on planks, eyes tracking orders that float just ahead of words. Your small cutters cruise a lazy figure, 8 like gulls pretending not to notice a shark. The gendarmerie posts at intersections with lanterns and water, not bayonets. You rehearse the code you wrote for them, the syllables steady as counting. Speak first, move slow, hold only to steady, record everything. A British consul watches from a balcony with a face like a shutter half open. The Japanese consul stands beside him, gloved hands folded, gaze fixed on the street where 2 children argue over a marble they will both forget by supper. In Washington, a new administration reads a report that will become a bruise on a conscience. Blount arrives and listens with a prosecutor's silence. He rides the road dust and counts voices and ships and the way a minister's words weigh more than his title says they should. His pages fill with ink that does not flatter the men who prefer shortcuts. You hear the rumor of his conclusions before the ink dries, a murmur that lifts a corner of the island's fear, as if someone cracked a window in a sealed room. He sends the pages east. A senator prepares a rebuttal, heavy as a door. You breathe anyway. Inside the palace, you calculate speed. A coalition cabinet forms at a table where the coffee has gone cold. Names that rarely sit together sit. A labor leader with bagass still clinging to his cuffs. A jurist whose opinions have made enemies and friends in equal number. A planter's son who likes machines more than margins. A Kanaka Maoli elder who speaks with an accuracy that makes everyone stop fidgeting. They assemble the day into a shape that can carry weight. They sign their own names first. They leave 3 blanks and invite the opposition to take those seats if they can say out loud that they will abide the vote and the court. You feel the risk bloom. Offer a hand and you give an enemy your wrist. But the risk is the only language everyone can hear today. The vote happens where life already happens. In a schoolhouse whose floorboards creak like old boats. In a fish market where the salt sticks and makes every paper soft. In a mill town hall where the soot fights the chalk. The boxes are clear glass because glass is a sermon, and watchers appointed by both sides count aloud in 2s. The charter carries, narrowly in town, broadly in the districts, names curled and straight, marks as precise as stitches and as shaky as dawn hands. You do not cheer. You drink water and keep the doors open until the last number is posted in the last village and a copy nailed to every church and store. Night squares its shoulders. A whisper grows legs. Someone says Marines are to secure public buildings for the protection of life and property. You walk into that sentence like a storm and change its weather. The coalition cabinet sends a joint cable to Washington and another to London and Tokyo. Foreign troops within musket range of the palace will violate a vote and a standing promise to consult. The British consul signs a note that takes no sides and insists on time. The Japanese consul signs another that insists on order. The U.S. minister receives both and discovers that concern looks smaller when 3 flags hang in the same room. You walk to the minister's residence with a ledger under your arm. It is not a list of grievances, it is a list of costs. If Marines hold a public building while the court has not spoken, your harbor fees are suspended for all vessels belonging to the power that violates your peace. If the court is allowed to speak, those fees are reduced for 6 months as a demonstration of good faith. You refuse to make sovereignty sound like poetry. You make it sound like arithmetic. Morning comes in clean and a little stunned. The court meets with windows open so the street can listen. The chief judge reads slowly. She cites powers and limits. She names the vote's margin in every district, the chain of custody for each box, the statutes that authorize observers from any party to stand within earshot. She recognizes the cabinet formed by coalition on the narrowest grounds possible. Provisional, revocable, if the constitution they propose fails. Bound to bring the charter to the floor within 10 days and submit all disputes to arbitration before any foreign legation lifts a finger. She says one more sentence, almost a whisper on the transcript. No man may call himself the law while holding its throat. The Boston stays where it is. The Marines do not advance. The committee looks at one another over coffee grown bitter and discovers that coups get cold when the kitchen loses its heat. They file petitions. They write letters to editors who answer with a new tone. Respect, impatience, fatigue. In Washington, the Blount Report lands with the force of a hand on a table, and the administration that reads it decides aloud that restoration should be explored rather than annexation embraced. The exploration drags. The decision is shy. The politics are treacherous. But a door you feared shut does not close today. You spend the reprieve like a miser spends coin, and like a mother spends time, aware both are finite and neither forgives waste. Pearl Harbor becomes paper before it becomes destiny. 3 delegations sit at a long table and copy language that will play referee between steel and water. A multi-power commission is named in clauses that bite. Inspectors employed by the Harbor Board, but nominated by different flags. Public tonnage registers in 3 languages. Demilitarized keys where a child could chase a crab without tripping over a shell. Fines pegged to cargo value, not captain's charm. Coal, rope, paint, repair. Yes. Shells, torpedoes, long-stay warships. No. You carve exceptions smaller than a thumbnail and make every exception report to the press. You make the harbor pay for schools. Every ton pays a whisper that becomes a teacher's salary in Hilo, a roof over a library in Lahaina, a set of maps for a classroom where a boy in a threadbare shirt learns to trace both the old names and the new without apology. You make the harbor pay for the court that polices it. Fees flow through a channel that cannot be diverted without the signatures of all three commissioners and the court's public consent. The first time someone tries to slip a pipe beneath the budget wall, the bench hears the case in a week and writes an opinion that reads like a hand tapping a knife on a plate. No. On a hill above Honolulu, a school opens that does not ask children to choose a mother tongue at the door. Hawaiian and English share the chalkboard. Japanese and Portuguese appear in afternoon sessions that teach letters for business, as well as songs for weddings. The Civil Service institute 2 exams, one for law and maths, and one for languages. Any 2 from the island's living list. A clerk who speaks Hawaiian and Japanese earns a bump, not a scold. A police report written clean in either tongue is a document. Written in both is a bridge. You notice the way tempers cool when the desk on the other side of the counter answers back in words that feel like home. In 1898, the world speeds up. War hammers east and spills west. Men in Washington count coaling stations on their fingers and say Hawaii, as if the word is a hinge they intend to own. Annexation rides every conversation like a second horse beside the one you mounted at dawn. You cannot outshout the cavalry. You can't outlast the gallop. The commission meets. The inspectors walk their rounds with clipboards and eyes that note hull numbers and cargo with a churchwarden's care. A U.S. captain requests privileges the rules do not grant. The minutes print the refusal and the compromise, 36 hours for repairs, no ammunition landed, and the world does not end. Your coalition loses votes and wins others. Cabinets change temperature. The court refuses a case you wish it would take and takes one you wish it would refuse. Neutrality lives with the awkwardness of a guest who is not sure where to put his hands. Yet the years begin to hang like lay on a line. 1900, 1905, 1910. A cable finally hums, drops its electric thread into your mornings. Prices tick across the paper with the patience of tide tables. A child in Waimea reads about a strike in Yokohama and a harvest in Fiji and decides he will learn to draw maps just to understand why distances feel shorter than they used to. You stand at Pearl Harbor on a day when the light makes everything look newly washed. A tug fusses at a liner's flank. A launch puts an inspector aboard with a briefcase and a pencil. On the far side of the channel, mangroves lean into brackish water like old men telling jokes they refuse to repeat. You listen for the deeper knock beneath the surface and still hear it, the depth that calls to admirals, to the idea of empire with engines. You have not silenced the call. You have placed a metronome beside it and trained the island to keep time against the drum. War breaks in Europe in 1914 and rips north and east to the Pacific in rumor and requisition. Neutrality becomes a discipline rather than a word. Holes are counted, flights denied, manifests inspected with the gentleness of a surgeon and the suspicion of a customs man who has seen every trick twice. You allow hospital ships to coal. You route telegrams for prisoners' families. You publish the names of vessels you assist so that kindness cannot hide contraband. Admirals scowl, merchants grumble, missionaries bless you through tight teeth. You are learning the cost of being a small country that refuses to be a small person. By 1919, you walk into a room that smells of paper and ambition and watch a new order attempt to teach the world how to argue without loading guns. You bring your harbor rules as homework. You bring your court opinions as recipes. You bring your referendum as a relic that still works. You are not naive enough to think parchment can restrain steel forever. You are sober enough to know that without parchment, the steel arrives sooner, stays longer, and forgets to leave. The storm you have kept at the edge of the horizon takes shape. Airplanes change the math of distance and the etiquette of harbors. Radios stop being room-sized and begin to fit in pockets the size of fists. Admirals stop whispering your name and begin to say it out loud in rooms where maps are marked with wax pencil and wiped with sleeves. You stand at the rail of a cutter as the wind pulls at your coat and watch a battleship pass beyond your line, immense and indifferent. And you ask the only question that matters now. When the century turns hard and engines grow teeth in the sky, will paper still hold its line, or will steel decide what your morning sounds like? Wind thins above the reef and brings the radio room a smell like cold metal. You watch a green lamp blink on Baritania and hear 5 words that change posture more than they change facts. Neutrality under inspection, still holding. A clerk notes hull numbers in a ledger stained with coffee. Another clerk folds a paper and writes a single line on the outside so a messenger can read it without breaking the seal. Deny basing, permit coal, publish movement. In 1931, a map of Manchuria pins itself to a corkboard in Honolulu and makes distance feel dishonest. By 1937, the pins march down the coast of China, and the Harbor Commission moves from monthly meetings to weekly, then to daily, pencils sharpened to nubs. Housings hum as the coastal radios check their teeth, the cutters idle in channel light, paint scuffed, boilers faithful. You count what you can count, entries, departures, tonnage, hours. A vessel may remain under repair without becoming a fixture. Inspectors carry clipboards like shields and memorize the sound of lawful work. Hospital ships slide in with red crosses bright enough to stab the eye. They coal, water, leave under escort. Warships request anchorage and are told what they have been told since the ink dried. No magazines landed, no munitions stored. 36 hours and not a minute more. The requirement tastes like salt in some mouths and like ash in others. You put the taste in the minutes where everyone can see it. A winter squall lifts white caps off the channel and smears them into air. A Japanese cruiser appears on the horizon and then declines to enter. Its captain reading aloud the regulations to a bridge crowded with binoculars. An American freighter pretends not to be a naval auxiliary until an inspector's hand rests on a crate stamped in a font more honest than the manifest. The fine is heavy enough to bruise. A British tanker pays fees without argument and leaves behind a letter to the editor praising the clarity of the rules. You cut the letter out and pin it above the desk that calculates school salaries. December becomes a kind of drum. The week narrows. Telegrams arrive with formal edges. Admirals speak in sentences that do not admit laughter. You smell kerosene, cordite from some other harbor, the metal breath that precedes bad decisions. A scout plane crosses a line you drew on maps, and you hear its motor above Manoa, like a question without punctuation. It lands short on fuel, the pilot gray with exhaustion and training. He salutes in the wrong direction, then properly, then goes still. You take his sidearm as gently as you would take a flask from a friend too drunk to climb stairs and file the internment papers in a drawer worn smooth at the knob. You publish the violation in all 3 newspapers, with a line printed larger than the rest. Belligerent aircraft will be interned, crews treated, ownership notified, and release governed by the same rules for all flags. On a Sunday, the island holds its breath. Far to the west, the sky tears. Reports arrive like stones thrown on a roof. Wake, Guam, the Philippines, Malaya. You count not hours but obligations. The commission meets with the doors unlatched and 3 clocks arguing on the wall. The room smells of damp wool and the coffee everyone forgets to drink. The minutes record what you can do and what you refuse to pretend you can do. Refuse basing rights, intern armed vessels that violate quarantine, permit hospital ships and relief convoys with cargoes inspected to the bolt, broadcast every movement on a schedule so predictable that secrecy cannot make a home here. The cutters double patrols. The gendarmerie stands at intersections with the same lanterns they carried for a referendum night years ago. They repeat the code for force under their breath, like grace before a difficult meal. A U.S. captain leaves the commission chamber with a face that belongs on a storm chart. He says your rules are a luxury. You answer with the ledger that shows how much cargo and coal and fee has crossed your docks since you tightened inspection, how much school and court and harbor light that traffic purchased. He says the ocean does not read minutes. You say neither do ghosts, and you would prefer to send as few new ones as possible into the water this week. He looks at your hand on the paper and decides to leave his signature off the protest he will send anyway. You use the year the war gives you the way. A surgeon uses a pause between heartbeats. Aircraft quotas, stated aloud. Overflight corridors, drawn with the patience of a scribe. Searchlights ordered to sweep not the sky, but the hull numbers, because names can be painted over, and plates changed, but numbers whispered on steel often outlive lies. You print a pamphlet in 3 languages that explains, line by short line, what gets an officer arrested here, landing ammunition, overstaying repairs, misdeclaring cargo, pointing guns toward shore even as a mistake. You publish the arrests with the same type you use for birth notices. The war does not love neutrality. It uses it when convenient and abuses it when brave men grow tired or frightened or proud. A submarine is caught too close to a sea lane under your protection and surfaces with a wound that looks like a breath held too long. You escort it away with a cutter crew that has learned the etiquette of addressing a captain who wants to pretend he is invisible. A convoy tries to use your channel as a cloak. You deny it, take the curses in 2 accents, and post the denial on the board in the square so that gossip cannot grow teeth sharper than printed words. By 1945, you are thinner in the face, richer in precedent. You carry to a hall in San Francisco a sheaf of opinions that smell like salt and glue and a little like fear turned into ink. You speak your sovereignty in a new register, as a nation that kept a harbor open without letting it become a weapon, as a member that can be counted on to publish, to inspect, to stand firm where soft would have been easier. The charter on the table uses phrases you already live with. You sign, not imagining the world will obey paper, but knowing you will. The peace is not clean. It never is. Sailors who could not visit during the war arrive and try to make up for lost time with noise. Your courts handle the noise. Tourists arrive in shoes that squeak on wet pavement and learn that visas carry weights beyond stamps. You design a policy that asks visitors to spend like neighbors and behave like guests. Hotels rise with height limits that protect a sky older than commerce. A university grows a laboratory that smells of plankton and machine oil and teaches a student to measure currents with the same seriousness a judge measures clauses. Undersea cables crawl toward your beaches and bury themselves like roots. Engineers in shirt sleeves haul them into huts that hum day and night. Voices cross oceans through your soil and feed a treasury that keeps school lights on even when trade dips. Land returns the way rain returns to a field that has been overgrazed. Trusts are rewritten by hands that refuse to make piety into policy without figures to prove it. Parcels that once disappeared into companies with names like promises return to families who bring their own names and stories as receipts. Not all the way, never all the way. Enough to change the taste of a neighborhood when it cooks dinner. Enough to make a grandmother show a child a stone boundary and say this was ours, and is again and will be yours if you learn to read both deeds and clouds. You do not get the glory of parades with jets. You get inspectors whose shirts are always a little damp by 10 in the morning. Teachers who correct accents kindly in fines that make even the bold learn new manners. You get a civil service exam that rewards anyone who can write a clean report in Hawaiian and English and whatever else life at the docks brings to your counter. You get a newsroom that learned during the war that printing what you know is not treason against any friend. It is friendship offered to the public. Decades fold, and you measure success in the absence of certain kinds of anniversaries. No day named for a surprise that broke you. No memorial cast in the shape of what anchored here and exploded because it had anchored here. You carry the memory of other people's tragedies with a tenderness that does not trespass. You take their widows' hands when they visit. You speak slowly. You keep your harbor open and your keys demilitarized. You count your inspectors every morning. You test the sirens even when the day is quiet enough to hear a mina talk in the breadfruit tree outside the station. There are costs you pay without complaint. Admirals keep you on chalkboards in rooms you will never enter. Some ships avoid your rules and sail farther for more lenient harbors. You lose fees you could have used. A generation of young people hungry for speed and shine leaves to work in cities that love noise more than you do. You teach them to leave in a way that makes coming back feel possible. They do come back, some of them, enough to remind the rest that return is as much a rule as departure, when a place does not betray its own mouth. Now you stand where you began, in the palace with the windows open to the salt, the seal still dense wax with a quiet authority you can feel with your thumb. The court sits. The commission inspects. The cutters scuff paint on the same pilings their grandfathers did. The children in the schoolyard argue in two tongues and then share a guava without needing a translation. A tourist asks why the harbor looks like work rather than war, and you point to the sign that lists tonnage and fees and schools funded per quarter, and say that is the music here. Independence did not arrive as a flag raised once with tears. It stayed because you wrote it down and made other people read it, because you accepted smaller friends to keep larger ones honest, because you chose friction over flattery and arithmetic over applause. The lesson is not grand and therefore it endures. A nation survives the way a reef survives, not by resisting every wave with a cliff face, but by being a million living decisions that turn impact into food. If you listen, you can hear it, the slow crunch and sigh beneath the glitter, law eating force and making it into shelter, again and again and again.